Welcome to the Best 5 Minute Wine Podcast with Forrest Kelly.
Our featured winery is...
So basically, I opened Hidden Legend Winery for what Harvard Business School would call the worst possible reason to open a business, and that's because the neighbors thought it was a good idea.
In this episode, we head to the state that has the largest migratory elk herd in the nation. It's the only state with a triple divide, allowing water to flow into the Pacific, Atlantic, and Hudson Bay. We head to Victor, Montana.
I'm Ken Schultz, and I am the founder and winemaker at Hidden Legend Winery in Victor, Montana.
Okay, Ken, let's go back to the beginning. Where did this spark come from?
Well, when we were kids, I had an uncle that was a research chemist and a serious hobby winemaker. Friends with the head of the enology department at Purdue and various vineyard owners and things of that nature. And his basement had all the right glassware. It was like Frankenstein's laboratory. So I guess that was the spark. Oh, yeah, that was early, under 13. I turned 21. I was going to school in Lausanne, Switzerland. I worked overseas for a number of years, and I came back. I got married when I was 23, and the very first time I owned a closet, I made wine.
Me personally, I've lived all over Montana. I just love the big sky, but how about you?
No, I was still in Ohio when I got married, and we came out here. We got married in 75, came out to Montana, saw it, fell in love with the place in 76, and finally moved here in 79. Well, my wife is Norwegian, and she thought it looked like Norway. And because I had worked there, I thought it looked like northern Pakistan. But no monkeys or water buffalo. There's something captivating about the Bitterroot Mountains. You can look off in the distance and see a whole train. Well, at some point, when hiking and fishing and vistas and all of, the alluring things of Montana kind of settled down to a little bit, I thought I'd make some wine. And evidently I hadn't thought it through very well because there's no grapes. However, I had read The Hobbit and I knew what mead was. And so I came across a bucket of honey that somebody was just disposing of, and I thought I'd make mead. I mentioned it to my peers in Ohio and Pennsylvania, and they were like, "Oh my God, Ken, no, don't make mead. It's horrible. It's thick. It's Vikings drank it. You'll give winemakers a bad name." And I thought, well, you snobs. I'll show you that I can make a mead every bit as complex as your wines. And so I made mead in the mid-'80s. Let me just put it this way. I have a driveway that's a half a mile long, 3 switchbacks up a mountainside. And the guy that used to keep it clear for me in the wintertime would do it twice for a bottle.
Okay, let's rewind just a little bit. Without getting technical, but getting technical, just to fill everybody in, and me especially, mead is often referred to as honey wine, but that's not really accurate. You make the wine with honey, water, and yeast rather than fruit. So technically, mead is kind of in its own category of an alcoholic beverage.
Well, the word mead goes way back to the Sanskrit, and the word medhu is honey in Sanskrit, and it's where the English word meadow comes from, which doesn't mean field of flowers. It means where nectar is gathered. And so mead is actually a shortened meadow.
Well, I imagine that the chemical process is very similar. You're dealing with sugars, but just different kinds of sugars. So are there some nuances to the whole process?
The process is very similar, although we do have to create an environment for the yeast in honey because there's nothing in it but sugar. And a grape contains just the right amount of nutrients and trace minerals and acids and sugars and to make wine. And the powder on the outer skin is yeast. So if you break a grape, you can't stop it from making wine, whereas honey needs to be adjusted a bit before it'll ferment.
We continue our conversation with Ken Schultz of Hidden Legend Winery. And that brings us up to the question, Ken, how often are you making mead?
In a winery, grapes come ripe in the fall. Of course, there's things to do all year, but that's called the crush. They harvest the grapes, they crush them, they press them, they get them in the tanks, and they ferment, and then they sit in the tanks for a while. Then they look to finishing the wines, and the whites come first, and they're usually in the bottle before Christmas, and then the reds sit all winter, and they're in the bottle by June. They really only make wine once a year, and that's during the fall. I make wine continuously. I buy honey 12 to 30,000 pounds at a time, and I am continually, if I get an empty tank, I fill the tank. That can be a couple of times a month. And so I don't have to once a year look up how I did it last year.
What kind of honey are you dealing with in Montana?
Yeah, we have basically two types here in Montana. We have a wildflower honey in western Montana, I should say. Up and down the western side of the Great Divide, we have 5 valleys, and there's probably 5 major producers of, say, 500,000 pounds a year. Most of it is wildflower, which used to be, before the state declared war on it, most of it was spotted knapweed. And then there's a fair amount of clover honey. And we use both, and we have 2 very distinct styles of mead that we make from each. And the clover honey here is entirely different. I grew up on clover honey in Ohio, and I thought it was drab. But here it's very exciting. The national blenders just take everything they can get their hands on and pour it into a big vat and fill honey bears. Oh, no, that's hard work.
Yeah, that's very complicated.
The reason you don't hear much out of beekeepers is because they're always working.
We've all had honey crystallize in the cupboard, and then with Montana winters, I imagine you get honey in all different varieties of stages and things. How do you deal with that?
Montana is second in the nation in honey production. When we get it in the drums, it's rock solid. It is barely filtered. There's bee parts floating around in there. And in raw honey, and that it sugars very quickly. So you can knock on it, and it's like knocking on wood. So the first thing I have to do is put strap a heater onto the drum and raise it. And I do it over a 4 or 5 day period, very slowly to about 100 degrees, let it melt. No, I really try to be careful with the natural properties of the honey. I want it to come through in the mead, whatever those properties may be, magical or medicinal, and both played a big part in historical mead making.
Out of the whole process, what is your favorite part?
Going up to the mountain cabin and kicking back in front of the fireplace and having a horn of mead with friends.
Now you say a horn of mead. That just
horn.
That fits in
for
with
the advanced mead enthusiast. Yeah, we import horns from England, cups, mugs, and natural horns, just like in the 13th Warrior or Robin Hood or Game of Thrones. Yeah, 2 of my 3 sons are principals in the company, and a sort of a half-son, young fellow that we took in at an early age and raised along with our boys, and my wife. So there's 5 of us principally. We say you have to be related to work here.
Will somebody answer that phone?
It's time, boys and girls, for our listener voicemail.
Hi, I was wondering, did anyone beside the Vikings drink mead?
At the risk of upsetting a Viking, I would have to say yes, only because mead is the oldest known alcoholic beverage in world history. However, I would say that the Vikings did enjoy mead the most. As we conclude our interview with Ken Schultz of Hidden Legend Winery, we learn where that personality first started that would eventually make award-winning mead.
I set out to see things in life at a very, very early age. I blame my 5th grade teacher introducing us to National Geographic, and I just could not stand it. I was like just fidgeting until I got out of high school and took off. I started as a merchant marine on the Great Lakes, and then TWA started offering cheap tickets to Europe back in 69, 70, whenever that was. And I got one. And when I got there, I tore up the return trip, and I was just gone 4 years. I'm not sure how many crowned heads I visited, but I got 33 countries under my belt.
Reading on your website, it says that you are across from Pioneer Log Homes in the Schiefman Plaza. Tell me about your location.
Well, it's a little tiny strip plaza. There's like 5 businesses in it. On a corner. We're actually 5 miles south. We're right on the border between Victor and Hamilton, but we're 5 miles south of Main Street, Victor itself. Pretty much in the middle of nowhere.
So you're not getting a lot of foot traffic.
Well, being in a small plaza and having a beverage like a wine-like beverage, it's not something that people come in and have 3 or 4 glasses of. I keep threatening to put in one of those banks of drawers that the Japanese use for their executive power naps.
Oh, yeah.
So that, after 3 or 4 glasses of mead, I can just put you in there and set the timer and We don't have a lot of tasting room traffic. What we do have is wide distribution and internet sales. We ship to 37 states.
In this pandemic world,
It doubled. It literally from the middle of March on, if you would look at our warehouse room, our inventory, you would think, what kind of winery is this? There's nothing. I'm not making it quite as fast as it's going out the door right now. We have a term for that. We call it full COVID. No, we don't have time to do much other than just try and keep up with the bottling and packaging. And we've recently been out of our 2 top sellers, and we've just got those back online. And we've got other flavors that we're trying to get back online. I think we're down about 4 flavors right now. Seriously, that 4 o'clock glass of wine became more than just kicking back.
Tell me about your Mead Award winners.
Well, most of them have won top awards at one time or another since the 90s. And we've got some bottles on the top shelf of a display cabinet that pretty much you can't even see the bottles anymore. They're so laden with hardware. We pick on like the Finger Lakes in New York, Tasters Guild in Michigan, the Indy International at Purdue. Out here in Washington, we have the Tri-Cities Wine Society, and of course the Mazer Cup International Mead Competition in Broomfield, Colorado every year. We try and spread it out and get a good overview from reputable judges. It basically keeps me on track. And except for this year, there's usually a dozen shows that I like to go to. Anything from art shows to Highland Games to Renaissance festivals to pirate festivals. And of course, I don't get to see much of the festivals. I'm standing there serving mead for 8 hours a day, but it's fun to dress like a pirate and see everybody happy with my product.
All right, Ken, thank you very much. And as we close out, go ahead and give us your web address and how we can reach out to you.
www.hiddenlegendwinery.com. Well, we do have a Facebook presence. I was in Ireland, and I was talking to a barman outside of Dublin that we were talking about what I did, and he was just all over it. He was like, wow, I wish I could get some of that on tap here. I said, well, we've got a good presence. Maybe we can pursue this. And I said, go ahead, take out your phone and hit Buy Mead. And sure enough, there we are. We dominate the first page of a Google search for mead.
The best 5-minute wine podcast.
Don't forget my favorite part.
Please like and follow. Oh.